Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is SewRena and I am attempting to make my very first swimsuit, and of course I'm using a 1950s pattern. I'll be using a reproduction pattern from Lady Marlowe pictured over here. I do not sew with knits, mainly because it's not really necessary for the time period which I dress, and also because it wasn't necessary. The machines don't sew very well with them. However, my 1970s Kenmore actually does, and it has a special foot called a Q foot that sews knits well, but I feel like it doesn't sew as well as a modern machine. So I'll be using my Janome Skyline S9 to help ease through this project, and I'm so excited to try it. And I can't wait to see how this turns out. Vintage swimsuits are not as stretchy as modern swimsuits are, so I'll be using a material that I feel like closely resembles true vintage swimsuits. I actually had two swimsuits sent to me last year by a follower of mine that belonged to her grandmother. I'm so thankful that they were sent to me. I was able to really feel the fabric, see what it looks like, and then closely pick a modern fabric that's similar to it. And so I'm so excited to use what I've been able to learn off of the originals to make my own. If you're interested in seeing me sew through this process, go ahead and like and subscribe, and let's get into the materials that I'll be using to make this possible. I'm using this heavy knit material. It's not a swimsuit knit because vintage swimsuits were not super thin. They were a lot thicker with less stretch. Next, I'm using a swimsuit lining. This is pretty basic. Now let's talk about the tools that will hopefully make this process go by smoothly. I'm using some stretch needles as well as this Elo Flex Coats & Clark stretchable thread. Before I get started, I do some test swatches to see what stitch I want to use. This is the 3-step zigzag stitch, and then this is the stretch stitch. I went with the stretch stitch because I like the way that it pulled when I pulled the seams apart, as opposed to the gapping that the zigzag stitch left. This style stitch would help the fabric stretch with normal threads, so throw in the stretchable thread and it gets a good solid tug without any of the thread popping. Because of the way that the seams look when stretched, I would highly recommend that you use it for the dart, even if you decide to go with the 3-step zigzag stitch for the seams. Sergers are actually ideal for projects like these. I just couldn't find stretchable thread on big cones, and I didn't want to buy 4 little spools. Because I don't sew with knits often, it wasn't worth the investment. While swimsuits can be sewn with standard thread, for longevity it's been recommended that you use something that stretches or more durable for swimsuits. If you've made it this far, please consider liking this video to help push it through the algorithm. Also subscribe if you haven't already. I'd love to have you. The front and the back of the bottoms are now complete, so it's time to bring them together, right sides together, and sew them up the side seams to make them one. Now I start sewing down the seam allowance to make a casing to draw up the side seams. You want to sew this down at 1/4 inch. Because of the stretchable thread, you have the option to sew this with a standard straight stitch, or you can do the stretch stitch like I've been using to construct the garment. At this point, I'm impressed with how well this project is going. I've never gotten this far on my older antique and vintage machines, so this was very exciting. Now I'm using a safety pin and some cording to thread the cord through the channels that we made previously. So once I've gathered that up, it's time to sew down the crotch seam with a 1/2 inch seam allowance like everything else. The lining is made exactly like the shorts except for the ruching on the side, so I did that off camera. I'm using Pellon's Light Easy Seam. It's a double-sided fusible adhesive for hemming. This hem tape is the exact same width as the seam allowance, so all I do is press it down, peel off the backing, and then fold it over, and I have the exact 1/2 inch seam allowance, and I do this on both the outer fabric as well as the lining fabric, so that way it's super easy to hem without the pieces moving individually. It holds together well with pressure, and then for added security you take it over to the ironing board and add a little bit of heat and steam to really secure it. Once both sides have been secured and pressed, put them wrong sides together and then top stitch around the leg opening. I used a straight stitch for this because with the hem tape the fabric is no longer stretchy, but I bet you could also use a zigzag stitch if you want something a little bit more decorative or modern looking. The bottoms are done after this, and I'm really happy with how this is turning out. It looks really nice and clean and professional. The only concern I already have is the fact that the legs are too wide on this pattern, so it's definitely something I'll have to adjust in the future. I'm thinking I'll probably take in the side seams a bit and use some faux ties to hide it. I put down the bottoms because now it's time to work on the top, and first we're going to sew the center seams on both the outer fabric as well as the facing. The facing is made using the exact same material as the outer shell. Press your seams open, then pin them right sides together, making sure not to sew over the seam allowance on the center seams because you're going to make a casing so that way you can string the neck straps through the center. This pattern is a reproduction and it's missing one of the marking lines, so I measured 1.5 inches on both sides to leave open so that way I can connect the top to the bottom, because technically this is a one-piece swimsuit and it only looks like a two-piece in the front. I sew across the top and the bottom of the bra, avoiding the center front seams both on the top and the bottom and the side seams so that way I could turn it right side out later. Flip the bra right side out, give it a good press, and now it's time to start working on the casing. First you want to sew down the center front line, and this is easy because there's a seam that you can follow. In order to do the side casings, you're going to want to sew 3/8 away from the center front. And to make this a little bit easier on myself, I went ahead and marked this in with chalk so I'd have a line to follow. If you are a SewRena content consumer, then you know how much I love a midriff detail. So now it's time to start prepping my favorite part of this design, and that is the midriff. So I start by sewing up the side seam of the midriff, or the belt as the instructions would call it, and then I interface the other section, avoiding the seam allowances. The instructions mentioned to use muslin, but I used interfacing because I was unsure how the muslin was going to react when wet with the knit. Then I sew the top right sides together in between the spaces that I marked. Once done, flip it right side out, give it a good press, then do a top stitch across the edge. You do not need a stretch stitch for this, a straight stitch will do. With the remaining free edge of the belt and the bra, it's time to connect the two so that way it's a one piece on the back. Pin the pieces right sides together and then sew it on. Once these pieces are together, you want to press the seam allowances open, do a little bit of a top stitch, and then you can attach it to the bottom. While I finish up, let's talk about some of the challenges that I had to overcome in this project. The stretchable thread, as helpful as it was for the construction of this garment, it kept popping in the machine, which was so annoying, but I think it's because of the weave of it. It was easily tangled. The thread itself is weaved together very loosely, so even when it's not in the machine, you can see the strands coming apart. The constant breaking of the thread was really annoying, and it started to piss me off near the end of the garment because I just really wanted to see it through, and my patience started to run out for all of the snaps. By the time the swimsuit was put together in one piece, I decided to finish the waistband facing by hand because I couldn't be bothered. And then I finished it off with my signature on the bottom. And this is what it looks like. I love the way it turned out, even though the fit isn't quite perfect. It fits snug everywhere except for around the leg opening, which I do think might be an easy fix if I were to make this again. Thank you guys so much for watching. I truly appreciate it. Don't forget to like and subscribe to help push this video through to the algorithm. It's the best free way to support my channel. If you'd like to support me any further, you can leave me a virtual tip over on Ko-fi or become a bobbin over on Patreon. I would love to have you. The bobbins would love to have you. It's a very fun community over there where I get to share random ideas and progress shots. So again, thank you so much for sticking with me on this journey to making my very first swimsuit. I have not worn a swimsuit in over 6 years, so I'm really excited that the first one that I'm wearing as a mom is one that I've made myself. I had the opportunity to get this wet yet, so should I have any notable updates, I will definitely leave that in my community section. Thank you guys so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.